I never believed in fairy tales, and I certainly didn't believe in happily ever afters. My marriage to Tom had been rocky from the start, full of shouting matches, slammed doors, and bitter compromises. But I stayed. I told myself that every marriage had its rough patches. That love was about endurance. That if I just worked harder, communicated better, maybe we could fix things. I was wrong. The one thing Tom always controlled was our finances. Anytime I asked about our savings, he'd brush me off with that infuriatingly patronizing tone. "Let me handle it, Jenna. You wouldn't understand all the details." As if being a firefighter made me too dumb to understand numbers. Meanwhile, I worked brutal shifts, 48-hour rotations, running into burning buildings, hauling people out of wreckage, while he sat in his sleek home office, handling our finances. And for years, I believed him. I trusted him, until one evening, when I got home earlier than usual. I was bone-tired. Smoke still clung to my skin even after my post-shift shower at the station. My body ached, my head pounded, and all I wanted was a drink and my bed. I kicked off my heavy boots, dropped my gear by the door, and trudged toward the kitchen. That's when I noticed it. A faint blue glow coming from Tom's office. His laptop. Open. I stopped mid-step. Tom was meticulous about shutting down his computer when he wasn't using it. He'd even scolded me once for accidentally touching it. Said it was full of sensitive work documents I wouldn't understand. But tonight it was sitting there, wide open. I hesitated. I'm not the type to snoop. I swear I'm not. But something about that screen pulled me in. I stepped inside, my pulse quickening. His chair was still warm, like he'd only left the room minutes ago. I leaned over his desk. The screen displayed a banking dashboard. My eyes skimmed the page. At first, I thought I was seeing things. $6,280,500. I blinked. No, that couldn't be right. $6 million? Where the hell did we get $6 million? My heart slammed against my ribs as I scrolled down. Transaction history. And that's when the floor dropped out from under me. There were hundreds of deposits, tens of thousands at a time, moved methodically from our joint accounts into an account under his name only. Transfers dating back years. A sickening realization settled in my gut. I had been scraping by, stretching my paycheck to cover mortgage payments, credit card bills, home repairs, medical expenses. Every time I asked Tom if we were okay financially, he'd sigh, shake his head, and tell me we needed to cut back. Maybe don't order takeout so much, babe. You really don't need a new pair of boots yet, do you? We just have to be smart about money right now. I worked 60-hour weeks, took on extra shifts, and even sold my old car when he said we couldn't afford the repairs. And all this time, he had been hoarding millions? My fingers shook as I clicked deeper. Offshore investments. Transfers to shell companies. A credit card I didn't even know existed, used to buy high-end suits, watches, first-class plane tickets. Plane tickets? I clicked on the travel expenses. The purchases weren't for business trips, no, he had vacationed. Several times. Without me. Paris. The Maldives. Dubai. But it got worse. A recurring charge. A penthouse in Los Angeles. My stomach clenched as I clicked to view the details. The name on the lease, Samantha Wells. My breath left me. Tom's assistant. His blonde, fake smiling, always laughing assistant. Samantha, who was always so sweet to me at office parties, acting like she was just another loyal employee. Samantha, who once told me how lucky I was to have a husband as devoted as Tom. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. Memories rushed back in a flood. The late-night calls Tom brushed off as work emergencies. The weekends he suddenly had to fly out of town. The overpriced bottle of women's perfume I had found in his car and convinced myself wasn't a big deal. The way he started locking his phone. The way he had beg asterisk and pulling away from me over the past year. It all made sense now. Tom wasn't just hoarding money. He was preparing to disappear. With my money. With his mistress. And leaving me with nothing. I swallowed hard, my vision blurring. But instead of crying, a different emotion took hold. Rage. I had nearly died in a fire 2 months ago. A roof collapsed just seconds after I pulled a child to safety. My partner had to drag me out of the wreckage. I had risked everything for this life I thought I was building with Tom. And he had been stealing from me, lying to me, sleeping with someone else behind my back while telling me we couldn't afford a goddamn vacation. I gripped the edge of his desk, trying to steady my shaking hands. Then, slowly, I reached for my phone. I snapped pictures of everything. The account balances, the transactions, the travel receipts, the lease for the penthouse. Then I kept digging. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew there was more. And I was right. Emails. Dozens of them. Flirty messages between Tom and Samantha. Plans for a trip to Mexico. A draft of a divorce petition, dated 6 months ago. My hands clenched into fists. He had been waiting for the right moment to leave me. To take the money, run off with his mistress, and blindside me with divorce papers when it was most convenient for him. But now? Now, I had a chance to turn the tables. He thought I was clueless. He thought he could control how this ended. He was so wrong. Uncovering the escape plan. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop glowing in the darkness, scrolling through the proof of my husband's betrayal. My body was exhausted from my last shift, aching muscles, smoke still faintly clinging to my hair, but my mind was electric, running on pure adrenaline and rage. Tom had spent years carefully setting up his exit strategy. Years, while I worked overtime, while I wore the same pair of fire-resistant boots for 3 straight seasons because we couldn't afford new ones, while I clipped coupons and took side jobs to cover expenses. All while he was funneling money into a secret life. I clicked through his emails again, looking for patterns. There were hundreds of messages between him and Samantha. Some were flirtatious, annoying but expected, but others were meticulously planned. There was a timeline. 2 months from now, finalized sale of the house. Oh! The house I was still living in. 3 months from now, close remaining joint accounts. 4 months from now, file for divorce. And the worst one of all. 6 months from now, move to LA permanently. New accounts set up. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. The gall of this man. He wasn't just preparing to leave. He was preparing to leave me destitute. He had already pulled most of our savings into his personal accounts, carefully siphoning small amounts over time so I wouldn't notice. And he would have gotten away with it. If I hadn't gotten home early. I dug deeper, hacking into his documents. His passwords were insultingly predictable, a combination of our wedding date and his childhood pet's name. I was almost offended by how little effort he had put into covering his tracks. Within minutes, I had access to everything. And the deeper I went, the worse it got. Flight reservations for Mexico booked under his alias, Richard Coleman. A Swiss bank account where he had funneled most of our savings. A transfer of $50,000 to Samantha Wells, labeled as a business investment. A prenup revision, one I had never signed, one that ensured I walked away with almost nothing. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a heist. And I had caught him mid-escape. I exhaled slowly, my pulse hammering. I had 2 choices. I could confront him immediately, throw everything in his face, scream, cry, do what he probably expected me to do. Or I could wait, play the part, let him think I was still oblivious. And in the meantime, I could rip his plan apart, piece by piece. I stared at the screen, my fingers twitching. How do you ruin a man who thinks he's already won? A slow, cold smile spread across my face. By making him believe he still has the upper hand. By making him watch his empire crumble, without realizing I was the one lighting the match. Step 1. Lock down the money. The first thing I did was make copies of everything. I printed out bank statements, transaction records, property deeds. Every piece of evidence that would prove Tom had been stealing from me. Then, I contacted a forensic accountant. I didn't trust just anyone, so I went to Kelly Maxwell, a woman with a reputation for ruining men like Tom. She answered on the second ring. Jenna Harris? Haven't heard from you in years. Thought you were too busy running into burning buildings to call. This is bigger than a fire, Kelly. Yeah? Try me. I did. I laid out everything, the stolen money, the The offshore accounts, the mistress, the escape plan. I heard her typing furiously on the other end. Jesus Christ, she muttered. Your husband's not just a cheating bastard, he's a criminal. Can you help me? A slow chuckle. Oh, sweetheart. I'm about to make his life hell. We devised a plan. Within 48 hours, Kelly would file motions to freeze every account under Tom's name, including the Swiss bank account. I also authorized her to notify the IRS of suspicious financial activity. If Tom thought he was going to vanish into the sunset with my money, he was in for a rude awakening. Step 2. The FBI call. The more I dug, the more I realized that some of Tom's transactions weren't just shady, they were illegal. Shell companies. Suspicious investments. A fraudulent tax filing from 3 years ago. So I made an anonymous call to a friend who worked for the FBI. I gave them enough breadcrumbs to start a full-scale investigation. If they found what I suspected they would, Tom wasn't just going to lose his money. He was going to lose his freedom. Step 3. Letting him think he's winning. The hardest part was pretending nothing had changed. I still kissed Tom goodbye in the mornings. Still made him dinner. Still played the role of the clueless, devoted wife. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, I was systematically dismantling his entire life. Every time he smiled at me, thinking he was outsmarting me, I smiled back, knowing he was walking straight into a trap. And when he finally realized what was happening, it would be far too late. For the next 2 weeks, I played the part of the perfect wife. I smiled at Tom over breakfast. I kissed him goodnight. I asked him how work was going, nodding sympathetically as he complained about company stress and financial slowdowns. I even let him believe I was struggling, that I was still the clueless, exhausted wife who had no idea her entire life was being stolen out from under her. Meanwhile, I was dismantling everything he had built. Behind the scenes, Kelly Maxwell and my forensic accountant were bleeding his accounts dry, not by taking his money, not yet, but by freezing it. One by one, Tom's offshore accounts were locked down. His fraudulent investments were flagged. The IRS had already started sniffing around his past tax returns. And the FBI? They were watching. I still hadn't confronted Tom. Not yet. I wanted him to feel safe. I wanted him to believe his escape plan was still intact. That's when Kelly called me with an update, one that made my blood run cold. Jenna, we found something else. I gripped my phone tighter. Something worse than the offshore accounts? A pause. Then, oh, honey, Kelly said, voice dripping with dark amusement. Your husband isn't just running away with your money. He's embezzling from his own company. My stomach dropped. What? We traced several transactions from his business accounts to personal ones. Hundreds of thousands of dollars, hidden as consulting fees paid to fake vendors. We're talking felony-level fraud. I exhaled slowly. This wasn't just a divorce. This was a takedown. If Tom thought he could steal from me, from his company, and from the government, and just walk away, he was about to learn exactly who he married. Kelly set up a meeting with a corporate lawyer she trusted, a shark named Ethan Blackwell. Ethan had a reputation for tearing men like Tom apart in the courtroom. I met him in a high-rise office downtown, overlooking the city skyline. He was tall, sharp-eyed, and unapologetically ruthless. So, he said, flipping through my file, you're married to a man who thinks he's untouchable. I nodded. Not for much longer. Ethan's lips curled into a grin. Then let's make sure he loses everything. We spent hours plotting. By the time I walked out of his office, I had a full-scale legal attack prepared. Divorce papers, ready to be filed the moment I gave the signal. A court order to seize half of Tom's assets, including the penthouse he bought for Samantha. A lawsuit from his company, once they discovered the embezzlement. The IRS and FBI breathing down his neck, ensuring that even if he tried to escape, he'd have nowhere to run. All I had to do now? Wait. Wait for Tom to make his next move. Wait for him to believe he was home free. Wait until the perfect moment to strike. One evening, as Tom sat on the couch scrolling through his phone, I casually asked, so, any big work trips coming up? His fingers froze for half a second before he quickly recovered. Oh, yeah, he said smoothly. Might have to fly out to Miami next month. Some investor meetings. Liar. I had already seen his real travel plans. He wasn't going to Miami. He was flying to Los Angeles, to the penthouse, to Samantha. And guess what? His flight had just been canceled. I had Kelly pull some strings, flagging his ticket for suspicious activity. Nothing drastic, just enough to inconvenience him. Just enough to make him start doubting things. Over the next few days, little problems started piling up for Tom. His corporate credit card was declined. His company's finance team started asking questions about missing funds. His offshore bank account suddenly required extra verification before withdrawals. He was starting to sweat. But he still had no idea that I was the one pulling the strings. Then, the best thing happened. Samantha Wells, his precious mistress, called him at home. Normally, she never did. Tom had rules about keeping things separate. But that night, as I stood in the hallway outside his office, I heard his phone buzz. Then his tone changed. "Wait, what do you mean something's wrong?" he snapped. I pressed my ear closer to the door. A pause. Then Samantha's voice, shaky and panicked. "The account, Tom. The penthouse account. It's been frozen." I bit my lip to keep from laughing. She kept going. "I tried to pay the property manager, and the payment wouldn't go through. They're threatening to evict me." Tom swore under his breath. He had no idea that I had done that. That I had locked down the account before he could use it to escape. Now his mistress was stranded, his stolen money was trapped, and his entire world was unraveling. And he had no clue that I was the one who had started the fire. The best part? I wasn't done yet. Not even close. For the next few days, I watched Tom unravel. At first, he tried to play it cool. I caught him on the phone with his bank, forcing a laugh as he told them it was all a misunderstanding. He poured himself a whiskey after that call, sipping it slower than usual. Then came the second call. This time, he wasn't laughing. "I don't give a damn what kind of fraud alert was triggered," he snapped into his phone, pacing in his office. "I need access to my accounts. Now." I sat on the couch, flipping through a magazine like I wasn't listening to every word. But inside, I was reveling in it. Tom thought his problems were just a series of unfortunate coincidences. He had no idea that I was engineering every single one. By the fourth day, his credit card had been declined twice, once at a gas station, once at a steakhouse where he had been schmoozing a client. That night, he barely touched his dinner. "Something wrong?" I asked sweetly, twirling spaghetti around my fork. He rubbed his temples. "Work's just been stressful." I took a sip of wine. "Anything I can do to help?" He forced a tight smile. "Nah, babe. I got it." Liar. He didn't have anything. I had taken everything. And soon, he'd know it. Tom spent the next few days in a desperate scramble. I watched him pore over spreadsheets, trying to figure out where his money had gone. He made more frantic phone calls, yelling at confused bank managers, demanding answers. But there were none. Because the moment he had started stealing from me, I had made sure there would be nothing left for him to take. Then Samantha called again. This time, she wasn't just panicked. She was furious. I had been standing in the hallway when I heard him pick up the phone. "Tom," she hissed, her voice sharp. "You swore everything was handled. Why can't I access the account? Why is my lease being terminated?" I don't know," he stammered. "I'm working on it." "Work faster," she snapped. "Because if I get kicked out of this penthouse, I swear to God." I knocked lightly on the door. Tom jumped like I had ***** him. He spun around, covering the mouthpiece of his phone. "Babe, what's up?" I raised an eyebrow. "Who are you talking to?" His eyes darted between me and the phone. "No one. Just a work thing." Liar. I smiled. "Okay. Just wanted to let you know I'm heading to bed." He nodded quickly, waiting until I closed the door before resuming his call. But I didn't go to bed. I stood outside his office, listening. "I need more time," Tom whispered into the phone. "Just a couple more weeks. I can fix this." Silence. Then Samantha's voice, ice cold. "You better. Because if you can't?" A cruel laugh. "I might have to find someone who can." A minute later, I heard the unmistakable sound of Tom slamming his phone onto the desk. I bit back a grin. His precious mistress was already turning on him. Perfect. The next morning, Tom woke up before me, which never happened. I watched him from the bed as he threw on a suit, checking his phone with a frantic energy I had never seen before. "Early meeting?" I asked, feigning a sleepy yawn. Yeah," he muttered, shoving his laptop into his bag. Something came up. I knew exactly where he was going. He was heading to the bank to try and figure out who had locked him out of his own life. I waited exactly 10 minutes after he left before I made a phone call of my own. "Kelly?" Her voice was smug. "He's on his way, isn't he?" "Yep." She laughed. "Oh, honey. He's in for a rude awakening." I grinned. Good. Then I poured myself another cup of coffee and waited for the show to begin. It took less than an hour. When Tom came home, he looked like he had seen a ghost. His suit jacket was wrinkled, his tie was loosened, and his hands were shaking as he slammed the door behind him. I pretended not to notice. "Hey, babe," I said, flipping through a home decor catalog like I was planning to spend the money he no longer had. "How was work?" He didn't answer. He just stormed past me and went straight to the liquor cabinet. I waited until he had poured himself a glass of whiskey before I asked, "Rough day?" He downed half of it in one gulp. Then, for the first time since this had all started, he looked scared. "They froze my accounts," he muttered. I blinked. "What?" "All of them," he said, his voice tight. "They said it was flagged for suspicious activity." I gasped, putting on my best shocked expression. "Wait, what does that mean? Can you fix it?" He raked a hand through his hair. I don't know. They're looking into it, but they said it could take weeks before they figure out what happened." "Oh, honey." I knew exactly what happened, because I was the one who had orchestrated every single piece of it. I let out a sympathetic sigh. "That's awful, baby." He exhaled sharply. "Yeah." Then, hesitantly, he looked at me. "Jenna, I might need you to cover a few bills this month." Oh. So this was the next phase of his plan. Now that he had no access to his stolen money, he was going to lean on me. After years of gaslighting me about our finances. After years of making me feel guilty for buying myself a damn coffee. After stealing millions and planning to abandon me with nothing. I wanted to laugh in his face. But instead, I smiled sweetly. "Of course, babe," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. "That's what partners do, right?" His shoulders sagged with relief. "Yeah, exactly." "Oh, Tom, you have no idea. Because I wasn't your partner anymore. I was your executioner." "And you?" "You were running out of time." Tom thought I was on his side. That was the most satisfying part. Every morning, he kissed me goodbye before heading to work, which really meant driving between his bank, his accountant, and whoever else he thought could fix his rapidly crumbling life. Every night, he came home a little more defeated, dropping his briefcase onto the counter like it physically weighed him down. And every time he looked at me, I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was trying to figure out when and how things had gone wrong. But he still hadn't figured out who was responsible. And that was the best part. Because Tom had underestimated me his entire life. Now, it was my turn to return the favor. I let him believe I was completely oblivious. I made him dinner, rubbed his shoulders when he came home looking stressed, nodded sympathetically when he muttered about financial mishaps. I even offered to cover some of the bills, just like a good wife would. And every time I transferred money to our joint account, just enough to keep him from panicking, I thought about the fact that he had tried to steal everything from me. He had spent years preparing to leave me with nothing. Now, I was watching him drown while he thanked me for throwing him a life raft. But the real fun hadn't even started yet. That came a week later when Tom's company found out what he had been doing. I had been waiting for this moment. For weeks, I had worked with Kelly and Ethan to make sure every shady transaction, every embezzlement scheme, and every illegal transfer landed in the right hands. And now it was all finally catching up to him. It started with a phone call. I was folding laundry when I heard his work phone buzz from the kitchen. At first, he didn't answer it. Then it buzzed again. And again. Finally, he sighed and picked it up. This is Tom. A pause. Then, wait, what? I folded a towel, pretending I wasn't listening to every single word. There must be some mistake, Tom said, his voice tightening. I would never. He stopped. And in that moment of silence, I knew he was screwed. Because whoever was on the other end wasn't asking him questions anymore. They were telling him what was about to happen. Tom ran a hand through his hair, pacing the kitchen. No, listen, just give me a few days to sort this out. Pause. No, I don't need a lawyer, for Christ's sake. It's a misunderstanding. Liar. I picked up another towel, hiding my smile. He had no idea that I was 3 steps ahead of him. That I had already given his company everything they needed to turn on him. And now, they finally had. He hung up the phone so hard it nearly cracked. Then he stormed past me, grabbing his jacket. I gotta go, he muttered. Everything okay? I asked innocently. His jaw clenched. Yeah, just a work thing. He didn't even wait for my response before slamming the door behind him. And I sat back on the couch, reached for my glass of wine, and waited for the real storm to hit. Because by the time he came home, he wouldn't just be losing his company. He would be losing everything else too. Tom didn't come home until late that night. By then, I was curled up on the couch, pretending to watch TV, when really, I was waiting for the moment he finally cracked. And oh, did he crack. The front door slammed so hard that one of the picture frames on the wall shook. Tom stormed into the living room, his tie half undone, his eyes wild. Jenna, he said, his voice hoarse. I turned, blinking like I had no idea what was going on. Hey, babe. I yawned. Long day? He laughed. But it wasn't real. It was hollow, broken, and I knew then that his life had officially fallen apart. They fired me, he said, running both hands through his hair. I gasped. Actually gasped. Like I hadn't spent weeks making sure this exact thing happened. Oh my God, I whispered, covering my mouth. Why? His entire body tensed. They accused me of embezzlement. Ked in another sharp breath, because I was an incredible actress. But that's ridiculous, I said, my voice laced with just the right amount of concern. You'd never do something like that. His throat bobbed. For the first time in our marriage, Tom actually looked at me, really looked at me. And I could tell, in that moment, he was wondering something. Does she know? But he couldn't ask. Because if I knew, then that meant I wasn't on his side anymore. So instead, he let out a long, shaky exhale. I just need time to fix this, he muttered, more to himself than to me. Then he started pacing again, like a man trapped in a cage he built himself. I had never seen him like this before. Tom had always been so cocky, so sure of himself. But now, he looked cornered, desperate, weak. And I had done that to him. I had dragged him to the edge of a cliff, and he had no idea that I was about to push him off. Because tomorrow was the grand finale. Tomorrow was the day he lost everything. And I was going to sit back, sip my wine, and watch him burn. Tom didn't sleep that night. I knew because I stayed awake, listening to him pace the length of our bedroom, muttering under his breath, checking his phone every 5 minutes like it was going to give him the answer to his problems. But there were no answers. Because I had made sure there weren't. By morning, he looked like hell, dark circles under his eyes, jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. He barely touched his coffee. Meanwhile, I sat across from him, eating my toast like it was just another day. Any plans today? I asked casually, buttering another slice. His fingers tightened around his mug. Yeah, I need to meet with a lawyer. Oh! I raised an eyebrow. A lawyer for what? He hesitated. For a split second, I saw his entire brain short-circuit, trying to figure out how much to tell me. I just need to make sure this work stuff is handled properly, he finally muttered. Liar. He didn't need a lawyer for work. He needed one because his entire life was falling apart, and he had no idea who was coming for him next. But I did. Because after today, Tom wouldn't just be jobless and broke. He'd be divorced, homeless, and possibly on his way to prison. I smiled sweetly, taking a sip of coffee. Good luck with that. He barely nodded, already lost in his own thoughts. I watched him put on his suit, straighten his tie, and walk out the door like he still had some control over his life. Like he still had options. He didn't. Not anymore. The moment the front door shut behind him, I set my coffee down and grabbed my phone. Time to end this. I called Kelly first. Is everything set? She laughed. Oh, honey. It's already in motion. Next, I called Ethan. Papers are filed, he said before I even asked. Your soon-to-be ex-husband is about to have the worst day of his life. I smiled. Good. Then, finally, I made one last call to my contact at the FBI. Did you get the files? I asked. A beat of silence. Then, we did. And? They're more than enough. We're moving forward. I let out a slow breath. It was done. Tom had no money, no job, and in a few short hours, he was going to have no home, no marriage, and no escape plan. I had spent weeks setting this trap. And now it was time to watch him walk right into it. Tom came home early. Way earlier than I expected. The moment he walked in the door, I knew something had happened. His suit jacket was missing. His tie was crooked. His hair was disheveled, like he had run his hands through it 1,000 times. He looked at me, stunned, like I was a ghost. I set my book down. You're home early. Silence. Then, you knew. I tilted my head. Knew what? His entire body stiffened. Jenna, don't. I arched an eyebrow, playing dumb. I really have no idea what you're talking about. His hands curled into fists. You knew about the accounts, he said, voice shaking. You knew about the company. You knew about everything. I stayed silent. His chest rose and fell, his breath ragged. I went to my lawyer, he said hoarsely. I was going to figure out how to fix this. But when I got there, he let out a hollow laugh. He handed me divorce papers. I smiled. Oh, those. His eyes darkened. You did this. I stood up slowly, taking my time. Then I walked over to him, so close I could feel the tension radiating off of him. You stole from me, I whispered. He flinched. You spent years taking my money, planning to leave me with nothing, and you thought I wouldn't find out? I laughed, shaking my head. Tom, I'm not as stupid as you think. His jaw tightened. You had no right. I cut him off. No, you had no right. My voice was sharp now, all the pretense gone. You had no right to lie to me. No right to steal from me. No right to spend my money on your pathetic little mistress while making me feel guilty for buying a new pair of boots. His nostrils flared. I can fix this. I actually laughed out loud. Oh, honey, I said, shaking my head. You really can't. He took a step forward, desperate now. Jenna. A knock at the door interrupted him. We both froze. Then, slowly, I smiled. I said. Right on time. Tom's face drained of color. I walked to the door and pulled it open. Standing there, in dark suits and serious expressions, were 2 FBI agents. Mr. Harris, one of them said, stepping forward. We need you to come with us. Tom's entire body locked up. Wait, what? The agent held up a folder. You're under investigation for financial fraud, tax evasion, and embezzlement. I turned back to Tom, watching as the reality of the situation hit him all at once. This wasn't just a bad day. This wasn't just a financial setback. This was the end. He turned to me, pleading now. Jenna, he whispered. Please, don't let them do this. I tilted my head, mocking the way he used to talk down to me. Oh, baby, I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness. I thought you handled the money? His mouth opened, but nothing came out. I stepped aside. Take him. The agent stepped forward, grabbing him by the arms. Tom struggled. Jenna, please. I folded my arms, watching as they dragged him toward the door. Just before they pulled him outside, I leaned in close. This is what happens, I whispered, when you underestimate the wrong woman. Then they took him away. And I I poured myself a glass of wine and watched from the window as the man who tried to steal everything from me was shoved into the back of an unmarked FBI car. Justice served. Tom was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Samantha tried to call him once. He refused to take her calls. I got half of everything in the divorce settlement, including the house, the cars, and what was left of the money after the government took their cut. And Tom? He lost everything. I sold the house, bought a new one, and finally took that vacation he swore we couldn't afford.